We are inside the apse of San Giovanni in Conca, which, together with the crypt, is the only surviving part of what was once one of the most important churches of Milan. The building had ancient origins between the 4th and the 7th century. Its demolition allowed the discovery of its earliest remains about 4 meters below the ground. The basilica had a single nave about 54 meters long and 17 meters wide. It must have resembled to the Basilica of Trier, and it ended with a semicircular apse. Testament to the church's antiquity was the discovery, after the demolition of the bell tower, of the tombstone of Aldo, a noble Lombard, brother-in-law of Queen Theodelinda, dating back to the 7th century. The tombstone is today at the museum of the Sforza Castle, where we can also admire the remains of a Paleo-Christian fresco tomb, also found at the site. The frescoes were detached from the tomb. The first one shows a Latin cross between a deer and a doe, a baptismal symbol. The second fresco, on the shore side of the tomb, shows a date palm, a symbol of paradise, with 2 birds, perhaps partridges, symbols of the soul. During the archaeological excavations carried out when the church was demolished, the mosaic floor of a Roman domus was also found. Today we can admire it in the Archaeological Museum. It shows a large cat in the act of leaping, framed by ornamental motifs. The Roman domus was located along an ancient portico street, the pavement of which was partially recovered during the works for the subway in Piazza Missori. In the 11th century, on the original building a new church was built, to which belonged the same crypt supported by vaults and columns that we can still visit today. The building, destroyed in 1162 by Barbarossa, will be rebuilt by mid of the 13th century, with the exception of the apse and the crypt, which belonged to the previous church. In the period of maximum splendor, the church became the family chapel of the Visconti dukes and was embellished with frescoes painted on top of pre-existing decorations. The frescoes probably depicted the story of St. John, allegedly immersed, without consequences, into a pot of boiling oil. The saint's statue, once placed in a shrine on the church's façade, can still be seen in the ducal court of the Sforza Castle. Parts of those frescoes, the work of a 14th century Lombard master, were detached and pasted on canvas when the church was demolished and then taken to the museum of the Sforza Castle. Particularly impressive are the paintings of the Annunciation, which adorn the arch of the lantern. They show the Archangel Gabriel with his right arm raised, pointing to the Virgin Mary with a restrained, almost hesitant gesture. The building had 3 naves and 4 spans, supported by cylindrical brick pillars. The roof of the central nave was supported by trusses with exposed beams, while the side naves were covered by cross vaults. The transept separated the naves from the presbytery area, which stood in a raised position above the crypt and ended in a semicircular apse. The lantern tower was covered by cross vaults and was higher than the rest of the building. The south and north walls of the transept and the east and west walls of the square-shaped lantern tower were lit by large windows already in Gothic style. Very nice was the church's stone and brick façade, with a large round window in the center, 2 side windows, and a doorway with a faux prothyrum, typical of the late 13th century in Milan. The side aisles were probably illuminated by oculi. In the presbytery, in front of the altar, was the equestrian monument to Bernabò Visconti, the work of Bonino da Campione, one of the greatest among the famous masters of Campione. The monument is today in the Sforza Castle, as also the tomb of Regina della Scala, which was originally in the church's crypt. The monument is composed by more than 70 elements distributed over 3 areas: the base, the sarcophagus, and the equestrian statue. The base is composed by 6 columns, surrounding 6 octagonal pillars. On top of them lies the sarcophagus of Bernabò, surrounded by 4 panels. On the front panel are the 4 evangelists between 2 doctors of the church. On the opposite panel, the other 2 doctors are shown, beside an elegant scene of the coronation of the Virgin. The long panel on the left side shows the saints Christopher, Catherine, George, Eugene, Anthony and Jonas next to a crucifixion. On the opposite panel there is a Pietà with Jesus, the Virgin, St. John the Evangelist, and 2 angels between the saints Barnabas, Bernard, John the Baptist, Damien, Gotthard and Cosmas. On the sides of the sarcophagus also the Visconti coats of arms are visible. On a plinth stands the equestrian statue of Bernabò in life-size, carved in a single block of marble, with the exception of the head. The cardinal virtues of fortitude and justice stand beside the right. In 1531, the church of San Giovanni was donated to the Carmelite fathers, who built a new monastery. Several changes were made to the project of architect Regni, starting with 2 new windows in the façade instead of the oculi, to better illuminate the side aisles. The monument of Bernabò Visconti was moved to the back of the church by disposition of the Archbishop Carlo Borromeo. In 1596, the bell tower, originally 24 meters high, was raised to the considerable height of 42 meters. The church had not undergone any major restructuring until, in 1663, the prior Eliseo Bonetti decided to renovate it according to a project of architect Francesco Castelli. The Romanesque pillars were replaced by twin columns with an octagonal section, supporting mixtilinear arches. New windows were open and old frescoes were hidden under new stuccos. Nevertheless, the church was enriched with valuable works of art by painters such as Lomazzo, Lucchino, Nuvolone and Bernardo Lanini. In 1782, the Carmelite order was suppressed by a decree of Joseph II of Habsburg, and after the advent of the Cisalpine Republic and the spoliation of the church, the building was closed in 1808. The bell tower was used as a signal tower and later rented out to Count Pietro Moscati, who set up a meteorological observatory with devices that could automatically record atmospheric variations and innovative instruments purchased abroad, often employed in Italy for the first time. He could make astronomical observations, thanks to the height of the tower, exceeding that of the Astronomical Observatory of Brera. In 1821, the worsening of the Count's sight and his old age pushed him to leave the observatory to the Austrian government, so that it could be donated to the High School of Sant'Alessandro in the following year. The church was instead used to store carriages and machineries before it became a workshop and a warehouse. In 1879, the Via Carlo Alberto was opened, later renamed Via Mazzini, connecting Corso di Porta Romana to Piazza Duomo. The church was demolished up to the transept, whereby its facade was preserved and placed obliquely on the shortened building so as to follow the bending road. The works were supervised by architect Angelo Colla, who renovated the interiors in accordance to the neo-Gothic taste of the time and modified the proportions of the facade in order to adapt it to the new road front. He lowered the 2 oculi, rebuilt the 2 half columns at the sides of the portal, and added 3 tall pinnacles. The building, completed in 1881, became the new temple of the Waldensian community. However, the fate of the church was sealed when, in 1934, the new Albertini city development plan provided for the opening of Via Albrizzi. This led, in the immediate post-war period, to the demolition of the church, with the exception of the crypt and part of the apse. The façade was reassembled in its original proportions in Via Francesco Sforza to complete the new Waldensian temple. And this was the end of this unlucky church. Perhaps its fate had already been sealed after the Baroque renovation, or after the somewhat clumsy restoration by architect Colla. The church seemed no longer worthy of preservation, and eventually it found itself on the way of the notorious racket foreseen by the Albertini development plan, a new artery aimed at connecting the renewed Piazza San Babila with Piazza Missori and Via Vincenzo Monti up to Piazzale Cadorna, and at connecting them to the new central station through a straight road. Ironically, the construction of the racket will eventually stop right here in front of the ruins of the church and will never be complete.